take the next.
Yes, yeah. No, I mean, ultimately what we couldn't do is work through that. Either way,
Mhm,
work through our suggestions and then bring it to the commission.
mhm.
And if the commission has a quorum, then they can say, well,
Ah,
we like this idea and we are okay with adopting
oh,
this.
okay,
Yeah. That's essentially how we've been operating this whole time.
right.
Because we never have quorums. Um, and the only thing is that, so when we do get a quorum of the commission, it's great because we can put things to a vote, even if it's just a discussion
Mhm,
that has been happening here. But this has been tough because we didn't get a quorum for that
mhm,
last
mhm.
commission meeting. We got very, very close.
To the big commission.
To the big one in January. Yeah, so we're gonna hope, fingers crossed, that we have a quorum for April and that maybe the change goes through so we don't have as much of a burden in terms of reaching quorum. If we have fewer amount of people who are
Mhm.
there, we can still do appropriate business. Um, so I don't know. I thought we'd have a little bit more people. Um, but that's okay. I guess I'll ask you guys, I'll give you guys I don't know if I sent the agenda, but I'll send it and then I'll explain what the idea behind it was. And I guess you guys let me know how you think we should proceed. Okay. Mm, oops. Okay, so essentially the hope was that each subcommittee would meet and we'd have enough people to have not that we can't have a good discussion, but just so that we'd have more people to explain their point of view and get a lot of diversity of thought, um, in terms of having more members give their perspectives. But we essentially wanted to do a thing where we brought it to every subcommittee where we started talking about what the goals of the subcommittee was and if the driving question is if the mayor asked at any point in time what um what are you guys planning to do or what plans can we take from this subcommittee to implement them for the 250th celebrations or the commemorations or the infrastructure changes that we want to implement? What are they? And also thinking through the charge of the subcommittees where based on those projects is there potentials for funding. Um, and with that, I thank you. Um, And with that, I did it with the Timelines and Archives and Curricula Subcommittee on last Thursday. And I started with going through oh gosh, the report that we looked at back in January, where I just looked at the goals that we had been discussing over the 6 months prior and the year prior, um, just to see if we could take that and flesh it out and make it actionable or more actionable than just goals. And they didn't really like that approach, so I'm kind of moving away from it. What they did like was having discussions, open discussions about, what we've been discussing, where we think that we could look for funding and what we view the subcommittee, like the reason that the subcommittee operates. So for example, Timelines, Archives, and Curricula said we have been operating, they've been doing projects that don't necessarily require money because we haven't had a budget. But if they were to, have money or have potential for projects to go further than just the lower level work that we're doing, they'd love to have something where they could fund archives, right? So, or digitization projects of those archives. So they really thought about what they were being asked to think about in their or charged with in the ordinance and really thought through the work that they'd been doing and where funding could exist for those things. Um, and so that is what I'm bringing to you guys. I think that it was a good open discussion. And it'd be great to have that open discussion with you guys, but there's only 5 of us on the call. So I think it is tough to have a discussion that's not that we're not going to have a good one, but just it's going to be, I don't know. It's not going to be as I don't we're not going to have as much because I think if we had more people with different expertise, we'd have more ideas that are would be connected and interesting and easy to flesh out. Not that us 5 don't have good ideas, but uh just that our expertise is limited by the lack of people we have. So I wanted to open up to you guys and think, or to you girls, because to you all to see what you guys think we should do. If we should reschedule, if we should have a discussion with just us, I am okay with whatever you guys would like to do.
Um, on the subject of financing,
Mhm.
correct me if I'm wrong, but I think the only initiative that we consider important would be the citywide survey. And
Mhm.
that will be the basis, no matter what it looks like. And there's been a lot of talk about what that looks like and how we do it. The basis for a lot of other important initiatives. That requires a lot of funding.
Mhm.
Is there anything else on our mandate that, the legislative changes, bylaw, ordinance, all that, that's just political will and, policy development, but does that require money? And is there anything else that we would need funding for?
Right. I think that's the question because I mean it's proposing plans. Obviously, the citywide survey will cost money. Recommending reforms to the Article 85 process doesn't necessarily cost money. I think it goes hand in hand. Suggesting adjustments to better align funds. That also doesn't cost any money, I don't think. I mean, maybe if we say that we want like outside consultants
Right.
to review certain things, and we want outside consultants to review certain policies to see if they work or not, we could argue that there's a need for funding for that. Um, and then the rest of it is just putting forward other policy changes that would enable the city to have a more comprehensive, equitable, and effective historic preservation process. So maybe it's not necessarily so much funding for this group, but more
There's funding for
what
adequate staff.
right.
That's certainly important, as well as the survey. And I guess I'm assuming the survey would be the basis for
Mhm,
us, exploring more historic districts,
mhm.
including, potentially, broadening our definition of historic districts. Because those will all require research, but
Yep.
presumably the survey would get us part of the way there.
Yeah, I agree with that. Thank you. Thank you, Margaret. I agree with that. I think if we look at what we're supposed to make recommendations for and be asked to fund, I think that we can find a lot in terms of staffing. I mean, I would assume that every historic district, if we want to recommend new ones, every single one of them needs a new staff member. Um, that citywide historic survey we identified as needing a GIS manager so that someone is actively doing that map or actively reviewing that mapping data. That could maybe work alongside Dorothy, who's doing all that, so who's the assistant survey director. Um, in terms of CPA, I'm just thinking about our policy. I don't know what that means. Like I know we said we wanted to talk to them, but suggesting adjustments to better align funds. I mean, I guess that's just political will, not necessarily something that needs funding unless we, advocate for a position that's like a liaison um, that exists maybe in their department that can do some more, or a research person that can do some more community outreach um, to see what better aligning funds would look like. Um,
I feel like staffing will probably be needed in the future, but
Hmm.
that's out there, you know?
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
any new district that's created is going to take years in the creation. You don't need staff for it until it's in place. Um, Consultants would do most likely, as you say, you'd need like a GIS person, probably like a mapping person, but otherwise consultants are going to do all that.
So, but consultants need to respond to a scope of services
Yep.
and need to
Right.
have a contract and need to have that contract managed.
Mm-hmm.
And, the city needs to have somebody who is supporting that relationship with those consultants. And so I think that
Mm-hmm.
adequate staffing at, on the city side
Hmm.
to really support, we don't have to permanently staff up for, the citywide historic building survey.
Hmm.
In terms of, we're not proposing that the city staff up with city staff people to conduct the city survey.
No, and you're absolutely right. So a person who's because it's a big
Yeah.
job. Somebody, yeah.
And I think that one of the questions that we have touched on is, there are good models for, the built environment,
Hmm.
the architectural history piece of this. But there are less good models or less clear models on the
Mhm.
cultural and social history.
Yeah.
The places that may not be architecturally distinguished, but are deeply associated with social and cultural history. So I would say, in addition to the citywide building survey, I would like to maybe think about, do we do a pilot project or do we do some sort of cooperative venture with
Hmm.
community organizations and universities, or build on the BPL's project of, doing social history, work in communities and tying those to physical places,
Hmm.
and really looking for something that builds broader and deeper. And understand, I love my historic structures, I love my historic landscapes. I'm a design geek of long standing. But there is this whole other piece of what we now understand to be the history of the city
Mhm.
that I think we need to stretch a little on. And how do we express that appropriately? And Linda, you've done this work I think certainly more than I have. And what would it take to take a model like that citywide? I know, me either.
I know we
I don't
talked
know
about
if we've done
being-
this work. We just keep pushing the questions.
But that's farther than a lot of us have gotten. So.
Yeah, but you know what? This does raise the question of like when we were reviewing that 6 year, I think it was 6 years survey that Chelsea, or a draft that Chelsea showed us. I think we still did have and I think Margaret, you asked great questions about what cultural history intake would look like. And I don't know that the BLC necessarily knows. Not because they don't have any expertise with it, but just because it's not something that it's a question that's being asked now. There could be potentially like a cultural planner that they work with, or someone who does that kind of cultural research. I know the arts department does it, so that's something that can be collaborated on, but I think it's also different because the way that arts does cultural planning is very specific to like, here's how we will be bringing art to the city, and how we will be collaborating with certain spaces to make sure that artists are um, part of the landscape versus the like art, the intake, the intake of the value, which is hard to hard to define. So I think not necessarily a cultural planner, but cultural something, somebody who has the ability to, a cultural surveyist, someone who knows how to do that kind of work. Yeah,
I think we're thinking of this as the survey as a layered thing, and you got the
yeah,
bricks and mortar and very specific history associated with the buildings, layered with, yes, cultural and social meaning, and also sustainability, environment, climate. And I wouldn't know how that data is collected or expressed either.
It's also economic development, small
Right.
business.
This is
I
getting,
mean,
it
it'd be
gets
good,
really
again,
close.
it'd be good to bring
Yep,
MAPC into this
yep,
conversation. You know,
absolutely.
having just wrapped up our Chinatown cultural plan work.
Yeah,
Yep.
I would agree. MAPC, the arts department in some capacity knows how to do their cultural planning, so that matters. Yeah, so I would think that the 6-year plan that we have a draft of needs to be really fleshed out, which is okay. We have time, but we really need to consider maybe not years, but phases, because we definitely want to make sure, because I think it's one thing to go building by building and say, okay, these buildings still exist, and they have, this particular architectural significance, and then find out, do extra research to find out if they have social and cultural significance historically, not necessarily present day. That's a little bit easier if it's an older building, because it's like, okay, it's been 100 years. We found out 100 years ago something really major happened here, versus then, layering it into what's more recent.
I strongly encourage
Yeah.
is that plan, and I know Chelsea did yeoman service getting something out onto
Yep.
paper for people
Yep.
to respond to. I think the first step really does need to be, a little bit of filtering and prioritizing.
Yep.
To, raise up that equitable and effective piece of it. Where are the holes in the current survey? Social, cultural, I mean, everything's going to be a social history hole, probably. But I do think that we need to, there's been good work done in Roxbury, but there are probably places that need some additional work. Like, I would very much like to see us. I think phasing it is much better than year upon year. But I also think that we need to look at, a little bit of prioritizing work.
Mhm.
I know that CPA has done some good mapping of where they've done projects, including preservation projects. Which is always, I always like visual stuff, that's helpful.
Yeah. Yep.
But. Yeah, I mean. I don't think alphabetical is the best way to go.
No, I agree. I mean, I think that map that they showed us, where they showed the neighborhoods that hadn't been surveyed since 1988. I mean, I think that's one way, to prioritize it. But I think the question also came up because they are doing surveys for specific neighborhoods, but they're still not doing the entire neighborhood. So even when a survey is done more recently, we don't necessarily know how much is being updated versus how much new ground is being covered, or I don't know.
So
And I think that
there's
also
some
would matter.
things like, if we're looking at social history, that
Mhm.
would, I think, often prioritize places of public gathering and commercial districts. over strictly residential districts.
Right.
I think you're more likely to find, now there are certainly entire movements that got started in somebody's living room or somebody's garage. But, so I think that also within those neighborhoods, perhaps prioritizing, spaces used by many people in the community as opposed to individual residences might be a piece of that.
Okay, yeah.
I'm also a fan of including open spaces in there because I think
Mhm.
there's a lot of community building that happens in those shared spaces.
Yeah.
But those are just sort of my first take on it.
I think that makes sense. Okay. Okay.
Is Chuck
I
E. Cheese in a Google Drive somewhere? Do I remember that?
the draft,
Yeah,
yeah, it should be. I can resend it.
okay,
Um,
thanks.
yeah, no problem. Let me. She owns it, so it's not in my drive, but I will. But I think you guys should all be able to at least comment on it. But I can.
But I
And if you
think
guys
it
want, I
would be
can
great to
share.
have this conversation with a bigger group of people at some point.
Mhm.
And maybe having a more sort of fleshed out agenda. Like, these are what we want you thinking about, can
Yeah.
sometimes, help people prioritize how they're using their time. And maybe we
Yeah.
get people, if they understand we have specific needs for their brain.
Mhm. Yeah. Okay. This to me sounds like it's a Boston 400 thing where we say, hey, we are thinking about it now for the 250th, but as an output of the 400th, it's definitely going to, it'll definitely work. And it'll definitely be an institutional project. And that gives us more time to think through it, ask for the appropriate budgets. Yeah, that I think makes sense to me. But I think for I mean, I can just, make those recommendations. We do need funding wherever it may be, wherever it may come from for this particular thing. It is the biggest thing that is on our agenda. It's the thing that will cost the most money. And it is something that will have a lot of use for landmarks. And in general, I think people will really appreciate having their neighborhood mapped in a way that is publicly accessible and available, and not and digital also. Okay, so I think what we can do, well, maybe what I can do is review the Article 85 memo again, and maybe we take, I mean, it's great there, but maybe we take the cultural survey draft that she created and make it its own separate document. Because it's lived here and that's been fine for now because we've I think you are using the cultural survey as a way to justify that, it'll take some time, and while we work on getting that survey done, we do need Article 85 as a stopgap so that things that are that need to be investigated will have the opportunity to be investigated in more time. So I think that's what I think it makes sense for it to be there, but I think it does at this point need its own document that's very fleshed out, that we can start working on as a subcommittee, but also using to reference with other, other organizations like MAPC, or CPA, so that when we bring it to other groups' attentions, we can say, we have a separate survey memo that we're working on. and we're thinking about, here are the things that we're thinking about. And I think that might be uh, beneficial.
I might also encourage you to do almost like a cover memo of the memos.
Oh, yeah.
There's a really brief summary that says, these are our priorities. The citywide survey, the cultural survey, and almost treat it like an appendices, like here's the section on this or the section on that. If you're trying to get all of this information into a page or 2 pages as an introduction to somebody who's very, swamped with information.
Yep.
I think if we can highlight some of those key pieces, we think there should be a change here, we think that there's a need for funding there, very, very much like that.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense to have some abstracts. Okay. Is there anything else? I open it up to you guys, to you. About any other ideas, however wild they may be.
I just have a sort of almost totally unrelated question, since I missed the last meeting. And I know that there's a meeting scheduled later this week that has to do with a proposed plaque program. Did that idea, was that generated in this committee, or was that totally independent?
It's independent.
Okay, I didn't mean to muddy the waters here. I just wanted to know if. Okay.
Yeah, no worries. But yeah, I mean, this is really all we had. We were just asking what exactly we think. I mean, and in terms of, I think that legislation and preservation tools is pretty specific. So I guess one question that we should ask is, let's say, so we recommend the modifications to Article 45, and we recommend the citywide survey, and those things will happen as they do probably with those consultants and with the city taking on the process to change the zoning article. A question that I had asked was, what then does the commission do with this work, or what do these working groups, these subcommittees do with this work? How does it provide, expertise? How does it provide feedback? Does it need to? These are, questions that I wanted to open up to you guys so that we can really think through how these things that we recommend are part of this process, or if they have to be. I mean, you guys are tasked with making recommendations, and if you guys make the recommendations and they're picked up on, do we then not meet again? Or so these are questions that I or do you guys think that at some point we can open it up to, or should we open it up to more broader community projects to give feedback as they go along their way? I don't know, what do you guys think?
I think that we don't know who's going to be charged with these programs, assuming they get approved and funded where they need to be funded. Someone's going to be in charge of it. And it's probably not going to be us, right? I
Right.
mean, it's possible that a member of this group, but probably unlikely. So we maybe act just in an as needed advisory
Yep.
sounding board kind of capacity. I think to involve the broader community at this point, things could get so bogged down, you would never get anywhere.
I'm typing. Yeah, that makes sense. Okay. Yeah, Allison.
Well, hi, everyone. Just going back to Margaret's point about phasing and priorities for the survey, I think it's that could end up being controversial, but I think you want to emphasize that in the summary, and also that the priorities to me definitely made sense. But in general, thinking about cultural and social history, I mean, that stuff is so hard to gather and involves so much research, but certainly there's a lot of graduate programs out there at some of the local schools that it seems like this could be a project that might not have to involve that much funding if you had a partner that was doing this with a school. I mean, I'm thinking of BU and BC with their um yeah, the graduate school programs, but it just I mean, some records are just so inaccessible right now. I'm
Right.
thinking of the Roxbury Historical Society records, and they were all collected and then they kind of disappeared, and it's just it's very tricky. But anyway, going back to the phasing and priorities, I think that's an important thing to include, so it doesn't look like this is going to take years and years to get started.
Right. Yeah, that makes absolute sense.
Allison, thank you for saying that, because I think it helped me to also latch on to something, which is in our role as a legislative and preservation tool subcommittee, how do we connect social history to places
Hmm.
that can be protected and preserved? And are there maybe some tools that need to get developed for how you assess a place that maybe doesn't look the way it did when it was serving the purpose of social history? I'm not quite there yet, but
Mm.
just sort of thinking that through. And yes, prioritization is always going to be complicated because and every community, if there's an underlying lesson here, it's every community has places that are worth saving. And unfortunately, every community has places that are worth saving that we have not identified and we have not protected. And so it's that question of those tools that I think we also have to move back on a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
Because, you know, those graduate study, the social history pieces of it, how do you connect that history to a place? And how do you help people seeing that place understand its role in that history?
Mm-hmm.
You know, there was a woman who did a whole series of interviews years ago on the social history around Franklin Park called the Heart of the City Project. It was a fascinating thing. It's disappeared entirely because the people who were hosting it, the institution that was hosting it, didn't have space to host it anymore, and so it disappeared. So that's the sort of thing that I think we want to avoid when we can. Because all of this wonderful work was done. And you wouldn't know if you were a park user, the Irish history of the park, the Jewish history of the park, the Black history of the, like, all of that is not present in the space.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how to make it present without overloading the signage, which I hate, but we'll see.
Yeah. I think, you know, that brought up a great point of who will host these archives, that maybe multiple organizations can host the city, you know, archives, Boston Public Library, maybe an open access thing. That's a good question. And I think another question that I thought about when you were, you know, discussing this Franklin Park social history was, and tools is, you know, I'm sure that there are people who know their histories and know which social histories are important to their communities, and some of them must be landmark or petitioning to landmark certain things, and some of them, you know, must be going through Article 85. But when something doesn't rise to the level of significance for landmark status, even if it's local, like what is that? What are the, I guess my question is, what are the alternate tools? What other tools exist for them? You know, or maybe that's the question we should be asking.
Well, and I think that one of the real challenges is the structure around landmarks is related to the physical appearance of these places.
Mhm.
And I don't know how, if you're a reviewer, like how does social or cultural history have enough standing to landmark something where some of the architectural integrity or design integrity
Yes.
has lost?
Yes.
Theoretically, it is true, then, but I think that sometimes commissioners struggle with that. And I think sometimes some preservation professionals struggle with that. So is there a way of making explicit, we want to adopt as a value that we understand that this is maybe not a departure from traditional preservation practice, but a expansion of traditional preservation practice? And again, I haven't worked in the preservation advocacy world for a couple of decades, so I may be way out of date on this.
I should state that the Landmarks Commission has always considered social and cultural history as part of, and any number of buildings have been landmarked who some of them really in very dire physical need, but many that were not particularly distinguished in any way architecturally. But they had such strong associations with an event, with the person, with a social movement. So yes, it has been, you know, a factor. It's often a factor, but that perhaps could be formalized or made even more clear.
So are there specific examples that you can think of, and you don't have to think of them now, like that we could highlight as this is the way it has worked when it has worked? And
I'm sure we could. I'm actually probably Dorothy or Chelsea would do a better job of thinking of ones, but I can think of in Roxbury, it was a church, then it was a synagogue. Now, Hennessy, it was very politically complicated. Red brick building, not very distinguished, not in very good shape.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
I was the one who helped Chelsea do the research on it, I think.
Oh,
It's on
what's
Warren
it called?
Street.
Oh,
It's on Warren.
Calvary.
Yes.
Calvary something? Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know, but it's the one that used to, it's the little Art Deco that used to be the theater and was part of the. Okay, so there's a church. It's off Warren Street. It's there's the street next to it is a National Historic District, but it used to be, it was the first Black movie theater. It was affected by the riots, or was part of the MLK riots. It at one point was a furniture store. So there was a lot of social context around it, that is otherwise maybe not so, because it's a small little Art Deco building, one story to maybe two.
And I mean, we've landmarked buildings that were practically falling down out of and eventually were demolished. One of them was one of the landmark designations that was overturned by city council. But I think we could definitely come up with you know, examples for sure, in addition to this one. Yeah.
Oh yeah, I'm talking. I think I misspoke.
is, have the other committees raised anything that they have said, you know, there really needs to be law or ordinance around this?
So not necessarily, it's actually a good question. And maybe we should ask that. So I don't think that they've said anything specific about law, like this should be a law, but they have this said, we think that these programs should exist. I think Timelines, Archives, and Curricula is really, they're focused on archives because they're like, Timelines is like to them, it's like, what is that? I make a timeline and then it is what it is. But for them, there's like, there's needs for smaller archival institutions that, for example, don't necessarily have the capacity to hold as many things as they have. If there are micro grants for them, then they can keep holding these programs. And if we provide some form of support for them, then we could accumulate these histories and understand them better. If we are able to give digitization grants, that's another thing that they've been thinking about discussing, because they're like, if you digitize these things, they're more readily accessible. It's what Allison was saying about the Roxbury Historical Society's materials being difficult to find. I think even the BLC materials that we have, there are so many materials, boxes of materials, but none of them, I don't think, it is digitized. Yeah, some of them, yeah, might be, but some of them are definitely not. And then events, exhibits, and trails are thinking less about legislation, because they are seen as like this is the arm that's gonna recommend the events that are very woo-woo commemoration, which is great. But I mean, I think that they have had discussions around, like, for example, the Freedom Trail was part of it's a law, right? And they did have questions around, if we say, hey, we are looking to create trails for the semi-quincentennial. Are we just saying, hey, we are doing commemoration commission approved things and we can provide infrastructure, or are we going to create a program around this that has structure and criteria and potentially funding, and digital services? Because we don't, they're like, we don't want to like solicit these ideas and also we could partner with programs to do so that they have people who can help research. So they don't, so we're having those discussions, but they don't want to solicit like anybody's ideas. Like I have this neighborhood idea and bring it to them, and the subcommittee says, great, and now we have nothing for you. Because it's almost, it's like not fair to the person who, went through this process of like, hey, we'd like to present this, we have an idea, we'd like support. And then the city doesn't really have anything to give. So that's, I think, where we've had discussions around that. But I think that it's a great point that I should maybe ask them where they see legislation playing a role in the, projects that they've been discussing. So I think some of the things that they will talk about will probably need some legislation, or will probably have something accompanying it, but maybe not. Maybe I guess it depends on the nature of the programs, but I do think it's a good question. Okay. I mean, I think I have a lot to bring back to Kathy. So I think we had a good discussion. But yeah, what do you guys think? Are we ready to not adjourn, but end the meeting, or do we have more that we think that we haven't discussed? So I think I can turn this into something. Okay. All right, if you guys are okay with it, then I will let you all go a little early.
Thanks, Hennessy.
Thank you.